Hi, everybody. We're going to talk about Parashat Vayeshev today. I think it's a great story that this week's Parsha opens up with, especially for people who just spent or are spending intense time with family that many of us get to do over Thanksgiving, because there's a whole story about family dynamics, and as with many of the first Jewish families in Breshit, the family dynamics are complicated. I don't know about any of you. If your family gathered yesterday, did one family member receive a multicolored coat to wear and everyone else got nothing? Well, if that happened to you, you're all ready for this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha starts out with a brief sentence about Jacob, and then the focus shifts to Joseph. We're at the beginning of the Joseph saga from now until the end of Genesis, which is soon. Oh my God, the world was just created and we're almost slaves in Egypt. But from now until the end of Genesis is the story, what's known as often the Joseph saga, or the Joseph novella. It's the longest story in Breshit, focusing on Joseph with the most literary flares. And we're going to look at the beginning to that story today. In a second, I'm going to share my screen with you, where you'll find the first verses of this week's Parsha. I believe Julie also posted in the chat a source sheet. So if you'd rather click on the source sheet and print it out or split your screen, you could do that as well. And what I'm going to ask everybody to do first is we're going to talk mostly about the last verse of the verses that I've given you to read, but we're going to pause for 2 minutes to let everybody read the 11 verses, so that we can use that as the base of our conversation today. And instead of reading it out loud together, we'll give everyone a chance to just read to themselves. And I want you to focus on the details, but it's the last line of the text that we're going to be talking about more in depth today. So what will come up are 11 verses. And what I want you to focus on is what's going on in the story as you read, but especially if you look at verse 11, we're going to focus on what was in Jacob's mind when you get to verse 11. Sounds good? Okay, I'm going to share my screen to let us start. Here we go. I've shared my screen. Oh, look, all the verses fit perfectly on the screen. So we're going to take just 2.5 minutes to read these 11 verses. And the question is, I'll even put it in the chat, what was Jacob thinking about in verse 11? So let's start. I'll put a timer on my end, 2.5 minutes to read these verses, and we'll come back together. All right, about 30 seconds to go. All right, I'm scrolling through my windows a little bit, and I see more people looking up at the, well, more people looking up before everyone was focused on their screen reading. Thank you. So this week's Parsha starts like a lot of Parshiot. The first sentence in Genesis, in Bereshit at least, the first sentence is about, seems like the focus is going to be on one character, and then the second sentence, in the second verse, it shifts. Jacob has had many adventures over the last few weeks, traveled across the Near East and back, acquired family, alienated an uncle, reunited maybe with a brother, finally arrives back in the land of Israel and settles down. And instead of reading about the peaceful last act of Jacob's life, we shift focus to Joseph the Dreamer. His story, of course, made famous not by the Torah and then by the Broadway musical. We read this week of Joseph's dreams and the family dynamic and the fact that he was the favorite. And at the end of the verses that you just read, Joseph has shared with his brothers dreams that seem to predict or describe Joseph as rising above his brothers and his parents. And the brothers scold him a little bit. And as we know, right after this sort of passage, the brothers are actually going to kidnap Joseph and send him off to slavery, take him out of the picture for a little bit. The saga will continue. But after sharing his dreams, his dad berates him, right? What is this dream you have dreamed? Are we to come, I and your mother, to your brothers and to bow, and your brothers to bow low to you on the ground? Right? Are we going to come and bow down to you and worship you? And then it says, so his brothers were wroth at him. The Hebrew word has a little bit of a sense of they were angry and jealous, both angry and jealous because of the famous, of the favorite son. And it says, and his father kept the matter in mind. So my first question to you is, I'd love to see, I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we can maybe be able to follow in the chat. The question is this, what do you think Jacob was thinking about when it said his father kept this message in mind? Let's hear some thoughts. Does someone want to, oh, I see. Well, we have a few in the text. Let's add some. Why don't we use the text to see what you can share about what Jacob had in mind. So Emily said, Jacob may have been thinking that he treated his son with too much preference and has gone to his head. So Emily says, right, Jacob's regretting maybe the favorite son status because Joseph took it too far. Immaturity, maybe, says Bill, and Mark says no, maybe it's prophetic. Bob says the father's wrestling with this, right? Not an easy thing to encounter. Other thoughts, anybody? Time to add it to the chat if you have them. Oh, Carol says nothing comes of Jacob keeping this in mind. Oh well, we're gonna check that out today, Carol. We'll see how that plays out. Phyllis and Warren say he didn't berate Joseph, right? He was angry, but maybe he didn't berate him. We kept it in mind. He didn't berate him. But definitely, this is something about conflict. Oh, Uri says Jacob is a schemer himself, and he notes the drama, right? Right, Jacob himself is a schemer, and his story causes some distress in the family. and now his children, maybe this is the payback, some say, that what happens to Jacob's children is a way of Jacob experience what he caused for his parents. Oh, and there's a theme, Wendy, you were right, there's a theme about dreams in the Torah, right? Jacob had some dreams also. The question is, will dreams come true? What's the magical quality of dreams, and what do they have to say about this? Oh, Marianne, good. You picked up on a big biblical theme, right? Jacob's noticing, right? He supplanted the older brother, right? While in ancient times, right, it was the older child who inherited the family's wealth and position of leadership, but not in the Bible. Most of the children who are firstborn do not, and especially in Breshit, firstborn children do not end up becoming head of household in the next generation. And Jacob might see that coming in his family as well, that it might not be the oldest who moves forward. All right, nice thoughts, everybody. What I'd like for us to do today is we're going to look at a number of commentaries about this this last line and see what some of the traditional rabbinic commentators say, and we'll see what that does. Tanya, you had a question, though. We could take a question before we move on. Julie, can Tanya unmute? All right, Tanya, unmute. Give us your question.
Okay, yes, Rabbi. I thought it was really interesting that they used astrological bodies, because we know the rest of the story. We know that this is going to involve grain when they go down to Egypt. But I was really interested in the part about the astrological bodies, because I was doing some Jewish studies where the 12 tribes were linked to a certain zodiac sign. And I mean, I don't know how valid this is, but that thing about the sun, the moon, the stars, and the fact that the 12 tribes had a zodiac relationship was really fascinating to me.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, you're right. We have a Jewish 12 months in the Jewish calendar, and each month is sort of affiliated with the season. And then the seasons we know are affiliated with signs. And there's a connection between 12 tribes and the 12 zodiac signs that we see right in the synagogue I grew up in. Actually, you could see those signs were incorporated into some of the art in the synagogue, right? The different signs of the stars. I actually like that connection, right? The stars in the dream represent the brothers, and they actually end up becoming being affiliated with the signs. It's nice there. I think the power of the sun, the moon, the stars especially has been lost to us as so much. I was thinking about this as I was out on a very clear night recently. I live in the New York City area, so you can always see the light of New York City on the horizon where I am, which blocks out so many stars. But I think the stars were so much more a part of stories in the ancient world. We know that, and in fact, a lot of the constellations are connected to Greek and Roman mythology, but we see those connections too that our ancestors in rabbinic times and before knew about the stars and the culture of the zodiac, and there was a connection made between the tribes, which come from the brothers, and the signs. That's a nice piece. I like that, Tanya. But this isn't, I don't think it's necessarily a relationship here to the zodiac, but thinking about how our great ancestors appear in the stars in the sky, there's certain that echo in the text here. All right, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and we're going to look at a few sources, and I'm going to try to let's look at them slowly, although I'm going to give you the whole screen at once. So try not to read ahead as best. Now that I said that, everyone could go and read ahead. But we're going to look at a number of possibilities of what the medieval rabbinic commentators say about this last line, which I put at the top, right? His father kept the matter in mind, right? So Jacob keeps this matter about the dreams in mind, and we'll see a whole range of different possibilities. So each of the commentators we're going to look at are one of the pantheon of medieval Jewish commentators. And on a different day, maybe we'll give a little more biography, but I'm looking at many of them today. Just know they're, each of the standard set of rabbinic commentators. If you're interested in learning more on My Jewish Learning, you can find resources for just about any of these guys that will give you some biographical information if you're interested. So use the website, because we're going to look more at what they say than who they were. So first, starting with Rashi, Rashi says, what does it mean when Jacob kept this matter in mind? Rashi says, he waited and looked forward to the time when this would come to pass, right? Despite the fact that the previous verse, he sort of rebukes Joseph a little bit, right? He notes this and he keeps the matter in mind because he's looking forward to the day when his favorite son, Joseph, ends up in this position of power. So Rashi has this being a forward-thinking comment where Jacob embraces the dream and sees this as the result he's looking forward to, and he wants to see this dream happen. Fits in with what we read earlier about Jacob choosing Joseph over the other sons. Sforno, another commentator, has a similar but a different nuance, right? He says he remembered it, the dream, because he thought that the dream reflected what in fact would occur. So he sees the future in this dream, right? In fact, his father was looking forward to the fulfillment of Joseph's dream. That echoes what Rashi said. But here now Sforno says something new and interesting. He says, doing this reflects a statement in the Talmud in Sanhedrin on page 105, that a person may be jealous of everyone except his students and his children. An interesting note, right, that Sforno is saying about Jacob, right? We can all have feelings of jealousy. It's okay if you're jealous, you have feelings of jealousy about other people. But when it's your students or your children, right, we don't respond to their achievements with jealousy. We actually take pride and joy in those moments. And the word jealous here might also be playing off what it said that the brother's response was. So the dad's response is different from the brother's response. And in part, it reflects, as Sforno, this notion that we take pride in our children and our students' accomplishments. And so Joseph heard this dream, and he took pride in the statements Joseph was making about his future and his aspirations, and didn't lead him towards negative feelings. And then he looked forward to this coming to pass. Next comment comes from the Malbim, another commentator. He takes a different approach. He says, Jacob understood that he, Joseph, was a prophetic dreamer, a future teller, so to speak. And so when it says his father kept this in mind, Malbim reads this more not about the dream itself, but about the attributes of Joseph. Right, as someone said in the chat earlier, Jacob is someone who himself has had dreams that has led him along the way in his life, and he's thought about how those dreams chose his path or predicted some potential futures. And he sees this quality of Joseph, not just the dreamer, but a dreamer who's predicting the future and has a certain element of prophecy in what he does. And we know from later in the Joseph story, Joseph becomes an interpreter of dreams. While Joseph doesn't take credit for being a future teller, Joseph gives the credit to God, who knows the future. That Joseph is just the interpreter, not he's just the interpreter of dreams, not the maker of dreams or the maker of prophecy. Jacob seems to have some insight, according to the Malbim, that Joseph will have some role both in his own dreams and his ability to read other dreams and predict the future. The Malbim sees that here, sees it later in the story and reads it back into this line. So what does it mean when Jacob keeps the matter in mind? It means that the Malbim says, even at this moment, at the young age, while he's still a teenager, Jacob sees in his son the role he's going to take on later. Radak, the next commentator, I'm going to scroll up a second while the words move here. Radak he takes a different piece. he says, a different take. He says, even though Yaakov had been angry at Joseph, he was worried about what the dream might forecast, and he remembered it. So we saw pride in his son, or pride in the son's attributes before. Radak preserves some of what we saw in verse 10, that Yaakov, was a little taken aback by this dream where Joseph puts himself at the head of the family, even above his older brothers and parents. And Yaakov has some anger, and he's worried that whatever happens in this dream might actually happen. And he notes this dream and he remembers it going forward because he's concerned about what might lie in the future. So before we saw pride in son, right now we do see a little nervousness, and Radak's not sure what's going to be from this dream, and he puts into Yaakov more a different sort of emotional status, that he's a little nervous, he's a little angry, he's worried that this might come true. He doesn't see all good in it, but he notes the dream, knowing that there might be some sort of probability that this is the future. All right, one more commentary. This one's a little longer. This comes from the Rashbam. The Rashbam happens to be Rashi, who we saw first, his grandson. So we had two people from the same family here on today's commentary. He takes a longer view also about the future, and he says the following: why did the Torah bother to write this? So Rashbam asks not what Jacob was thinking, but why is this included in the Torah? Right, the Torah tells the story the way it tells the story, and it included this line that says Jacob marked this dream and noted it. And Rashbam says, well, why was it important for this verse to be here? He says the following: the reason is that when the brothers returned from Egypt and reported about Joseph's position there, and Yaakov did not believe that Joseph was alive, he saw the carriages which Pharaoh had sent to transport him and realized that such an honor could only be bestowed upon a king, and that seeing that the king of Egypt had no reason to honor him in such a manner, the carriages, though sent with the approval of Pharaoh, must have been sent by someone in an almost equally high position, that is, his son Joseph, who had dreamed of attaining such stature. So he packed a lot into that first sentence there. Way at the end of the Joseph story, after Joseph gets sold to Egypt and rises in the court of Pharaoh, and the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine, ultimately Joseph arranges for Jacob, his father, and his brothers to move down to Egypt. And when near the end of the story, part of the story is the brothers going back to Jacob to say Joseph still lives, because they had told him years earlier that Joseph had died. And not only does he still live, but he has risen to a high place in Egypt, and he's going to bring us down to live there. And so Rashbam says this whole line now that Jacob notes the dream and keeps it in mind, the reason why the Torah tells us this is because of what's going to happen at the end of the story, after all the events of Joseph's life happen, right? And to finish up, it was in recollection of this dream, says the Rashbam, that Joseph had told Jacob, about which prompted Jacob to explain, it is too much. Not only is my son Joseph alive now, but he is the ruler of the whole land of Egypt. So that's a verse from the end of Bereshit, from the end of the story, where Jacob exclaims, right, wow, not only is my son Joseph alive, but he's risen to be the ruler of the whole land of Egypt, which he realizes when he sees these chariots coming to take him down to Egypt. And it's at that moment that he connects back to the dream which he remembered. So Rashbam says, why are we noting at the beginning that Jacob marked this dream and kept it in mind and remembered it? Because at the end of the story, when all the pieces fall back together, the family falls apart and they're about to come back together, it's at that moment where Jacob sees that this dream will come true. And the fact that he marked it and remembered it brings him this joy and gladness and exclamation of, not only is my son alive, but he's risen to great heights. And maybe you could read into that, just like he dreamed so many years ago. And that's what Rashbam has to say, about why this is here in the story. So that's a smattering of the medieval Jewish commentators. who are commenting about this line at the end of these dreams where Jacob, the Torah says that Jacob noted the dream and he remembers it. So now I just shared those with you. I want to open things up and see, do you like one of the commentaries better than another? Do you see particular insight in one of them or another? Do you have a whole different read of the story and why this telling of the dream sequences end with Jacob saying he's going to note this and remember this moment? Wondering what you're thinking about all this information, what your take is on Jacob's response or on the individual commentators' interpretation of it.
Sorry. I was going to say, as folks are thinking about their comments and questions, I'll just read one comment. This is an interesting perspective from Aaron. From a literary perspective, verse 11 is a cue to readers that this is something they too must remember.
Oh, nice. Thanks, Aaron. That's a good one. Mark, you're raising your hand. Do you want to unmute and jump in?
Yeah, I would say that it's an example that a person has a destiny and there's no way to avoid what's going to happen. It's going to happen. And this is the beginning of running that story of a destiny for Joseph.
Joseph's destiny is in the stars or in his dreams, right? And the Torah says he has his destiny, it's going to happen. And here's the first clue towards that. Right, I saw in the chat, Tanya made a similar comment, not about Joseph, but about the fact that the Jewish people have to become slaves in Egypt, which we know is the story in the book of Shemot. God says that to Abraham, right, a few generations ago, right? One day your ancestors are going to be slaves in Egypt, right? And it's through the Joseph story that this all happens, right? So there's a lot of playing out of destiny in this story in the biblical narrative. Thanks, Mark. Anybody else? Oh, so Betsy said, she typed in, right, the destiny here says what's vital, right? In order for this destiny to happen, the brothers have to hate Joseph and have to sell him into slavery because that's, what moves the story forward, right? So maybe there's the brothers' actions isn't always so kind, but Betsy points out that perhaps, right, there needs to be a character, there needs to be that sort of action, or we wouldn't have gotten to Egypt. That's how it happens. Although I wonder if you take Mark's comment that somehow this is Joseph's destiny, maybe if the brothers had a different relationship with Joseph and they hadn't taken those actions against their brother, if this was his destiny, he still would have ended up in Egypt one way or the other, because that was his destiny, no matter what anybody else chose. So Mark's view and Betsy's view both talk about destiny, but who knows what that means about the other actions and the other people. Carol notes Joseph is highly flawed, like many of the patriarchs and the characters in Genesis, right? He's going to grow to the point where he forgives his brothers and stops lording over him, right? Joseph, I think more so than any of the degree to which we see his flaws plays out over time, and the degree to which he overcomes them does as well. Some of that has to do with the length of and the details of the Joseph story. There's a way in which there's more character development for Joseph than the other characters in Bereshit, and we'll see a lot of that in the chapters to come, right? The Joseph story is going to carry us for a number of weeks moving forward. Joel, are you raising your hand there to say something? Oh, if you are, you can unmute and share with us.
Okay, I would like to just say that this whole concept of hate in a family might have been overcome through communications, where Jacob, did he not see or know of all this hate among brothers, hate among a family member? That this story says, wait a second, maybe we need to communicate with open, honest community. Maybe there may be a time and a place for hate, but maybe there's a time and a place for love. King Solomon, why can't we love each other? We're family.
Yeah. Yeah. Joel, there's a lot of wisdom in what you're saying. And in fact, we see a lot of examples in Genesis of, I guess, negative examples of what family life could be like. And so much of the pain could have been avoided if there was better communication or different actions by parents and older siblings. For me anyways, it's one of the reasons why these stories are so compelling is because the characters, the main characters, are so flawed. Makes it really tough. But I think you're right. And maybe it's a good story to read around Thanksgiving. Sometimes when families get together for the holidays, it's good times. And sometimes when families get together for the holidays, old wounds and dreams come out. Joel, I think what you said resonates how it's supposed to be. Ellen, I see you raised your hand. Do you want to unmute and jump in?
I don't know if you saw my comment, but I was supposed to be bat mitzvah last year, and this was part of my Torah portion. In fact, on Tuesday, I read my Devar. And part of this week's Torah portion is about the Judah Tamar story. But when rabbis discuss the Torah portion, they forget to mention this story, which led to the lineage of King David. And what impressed me to write my Devar on the story was when Judah said to Tamar, "You are more righteous than I." And then I wrote, about concealment and how a kid was mentioned in the Torah 3 times, and how it related to concealment during covert, that people can't recognize your face because of the mask, and concealment in my marriage, and how I was able to overcome the concealment and eventually have 2 sons that are developing the next generation, one assisting in special ed and the other one working with physician's assistants at Boston University School of Medicine. He's the director of research, and he teaches research for the physician's assistant program.
Nice. All right, very nice. Thanks, Ellen. Appreciate that. So first, Mazal Tov, that you're celebrating a bat mitzvah. It sounds like if it was supposed to be last year, COVID might have intervened. So many family gatherings and simchas have gotten in the way of that. There's a lot of rich stories in this parsha, and in fact, I thought about doing the Judah and Tamar story today because it's rich and controversial in so many different ways. And right, we see there, right, Judah, of course, being the brother who the lineage of King David comes from, that, which is right. There's a lot of rich stories in the parsha, and we see other dysfunctions, right? Joseph is sold into slavery, and we see not such great behavior from Judah, from Reuben, from lots of the different brothers. The angst of Jacob's family is not just about what happens with Joseph. There are other stories as well. And a lot of our struggle as readers of these stories in Bereshit is to figure out, how do we make meaning of the stories where the characters aren't so perfect? And I see that we had lots of interesting comments in the text about that, even noting, right, these issues within families go back to, just the very first family, right? the Cain and Abel story start. The first time there are siblings in the Torah, one kills another. Maybe it's a huge comment on human nature, and definitely gives us a lot to think about. And to me, it's a powerful piece that the Torah puts flawed humans at the center of the story, as opposed to perfect role models. Gives us what to talk about, and maybe one of the reasons why thousands of years have gone by and we're still telling these stories. So thanks for that. And I'm seeing a lot of comments here about people saying, "Yep, these aren't always good leaders." Oh, and Lior just said, right, there's a reality to these stories because of that, right there. We don't have fairy tales in a certain way that seem right imaginary. There's a realness to these stories, and it gives us what to latch onto and what to talk about as we're there. Awesome. I really appreciate all the different comments in the text and the people who chimed in to ask questions. Oh, Susan, you want to jump in?
I just want to say that I think one of the biggest examples of flaws is Jacob's reaction to the rape of Dinah, and ultimately his statement that, look what you have done to me. At the end of that chapter, Jacob has been flawed all along, with what he did to Esau on different occasions, what he did with the Dinah story, and now not sorting out the problem with the brothers. I mean, what good is there in Jacob? I begin to wonder. I mean, what kind of father reacts by saying that, look what you did to me, kind of thing?
Yeah, I hear in the exasperation in your voice, right? Jacob, for me also, Jacob is a tough character, for me anyways, to fall in love with, right? I like so many of the characters in the Tanakh. Jacob, as a young person, has behaves in certain problematic ways, and many people see what happens to him as an adult when he has his own family, is getting back what he caused earlier. But there's certainly a lot of pain and suffering for Jacob and his children here in the Tanakh, and it gives us a lot to think about. And I agree with you, Doug, that while here and there Jacob has his moments, as a whole, Jacob's a really tough character for me to relate to, because of his actions and his reactions to the various stories. And you mentioned the rape of Dinah story, just like the Judah and Tamar story. But there's some tough stuff, right? What we looked at today, just sibling rivalry, hatred within the family, that's tough enough. The story about the rape of Dinah or the story about Judah and Tamar are even tougher stories in some of the subject matter they raise, right? And the Torah doesn't shy away from those. So we are nearing the end of our minutes together, and I'm glad we got to go through these texts and the commentators and hear from people and see all the different comments that people wrote. There will be more to come in the Joseph story. There's lots coming ahead in the weeks ahead. I picked this story this week of all the potential stories from this week's Parsha, in part because it points to some of the dysfunctions in Jacob's household, and how sometimes actions of parents lead to problems, and sometimes actions of children lead to problems. And some of what I had in mind is what we heard, I think it was Joel before, Joel or Mark, I can't remember who said it. Someone said about how, part of what we ought to aspire to in our families is to have shalom bayit, to have peace in the family. And I think the fact that we have these biblical role models who don't always model that, it brings to the surface that we're each responsible for our own selves and our behavior in our family, and we ought to aspire to create family dynamics that are positive, even when we have tough things to overcome, because sometimes there's real strife within families. And in this day and age where we're just coming off a celebration of Thanksgiving and we're coming to a celebration of Hanukkah, some are living in regions where it's easier for us to get together with our families because of geography and of where COVID is, and some of us are still in places where it's harder to get together with families. Each of us have families in different sizes and shapes. And I just know at this time, especially given the last 2 years we've had, I felt the importance of having stable, supportive family and community that you can depend upon. And as some of those systems, both in terms of like immediate family, or for me also synagogue family and just friends and neighbors, it's been a time that we've experienced the last couple of years where we know we're for the sake of our health, making choices that diminish the role of extended family in our lives. And there's a sadness to me in that, and I hope that in the months to come, with the status of things in the world continues to improve, and that when we do get to reunite with our families, we don't go back to old gripes and dreams that split us apart, but we find ways to find love, tolerance, understanding, and in the way we treat each other, so that families can be strength to lead us all together to fulfill the best possibilities of our dreams and destinies, and not the worst vision of how we get to those ends. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful Shabbat and Chag Urim Sameach. Happy Hanukkah to you all. And I know both for the Parashat Shavua class and Hanukkah coming, there's so much that My Jewish Learning has to offer. I'm glad on this holiday Friday, so many people came online to study Torah. It's always amazing. And thank you, Julie, for facilitating.